All right, let's jump right into doing our regulator service on our DLX Luxe IDOL. To do this service, you'll need a 5/16 Allen wrench, you'll need a 5/32 Allen wrench, and I'm going to use this Allen wrench as a leverage point to get the adjuster apart. So that's what we need to actually do the reg service. So let's dive right in. So first things first, the regulator in the Luxe IDOL sits right here in the front of the marker. As you see here, this is the big locking nut. So what we want to do to actually get this apart is we want to take our 5/16 Allen wrench, we want to stick it in just the locking nut. What we don't want to do is we don't want to stick it too far. If you stick it in really far, it can actually grab the regulator housing also. I'll show you why it's an issue in a second. So let's go ahead and take the locking nut out of this one. All right, so that's the locking nut. Now that it's unscrewed, we'll just go ahead and set that down for now. And now we can take the reg cover off. That locking nut actually locks this reg cover in place to cover everything up. So then we'll grab that 5/32 Allen wrench again. We'll take the actual regulator assembly out of it, which is this purple piece here. And so the reason why we want to make sure we don't stick it in too far is we don't want to catch both of them. You can actually catch both of them, like bind them together. So you want to grab only the locking nut and then only the regulator at one time. So then we'll go ahead and unthread this, and this is going to get the whole regulator assembly out of it. So once we have this out of the marker, we can show you the piston and the spring are going to pop right out of the top of this. So looks like that's loose now. So we pull it out. That's our full regulator assembly. We'll set the marker down. So here we have a piston and a spring inside of here. I do want to point a couple of things out. So if you ever have a leak like in your regulator assembly, essentially leaking into the housing, what's generally happening is leaking through this hole. And the reason it's leaking through that hole there is because the piston's no longer sealed. So there's two O-rings that seal a regulator piston. There's going to be the one on the top that you see here. And there's actually another one on the base of it that seals the tip of the piston, which I'll show you in 1 second. So let's go ahead and pull out this out. This is going to be a piston. And then we have our spring assembly. We'll set those down. And so now we're going to push the adjuster out of it. And I'm going to show you the bottom O-ring that's a little bit more difficult to get to that we do want to make sure we lube. So to get this out, we're going to grab our 5/32 Allen wrench and we're going to thread it all the way through the housing. So it's going to be lefty-loosey to push it all the way through the housing. It won't come out the bottom half. It has to go out the top. So once that's all unthreaded, it's quite a few turns, we can just go ahead and press it out like so. And so if you look inside of this piece, this is actually our adjuster. There's two pieces in here that are very important. There's an O-ring that sits just inside of this housing on the top. I don't know if you can see it very well right there. So that's an O-ring we want to make sure we lube up also. So that O-ring and then the piston O-ring are the two O-rings that are super important to lube up. What we do want to avoid doing though is getting any grease on the tip of the piston because we don't want it to touch the reg seat. So if we were just to grease this up, we'd try to wipe that out with a Q-tip. We would throw some grease on both of those. I'm going to show you guys what the regulator seat is and kind of explain that functional part also, because it's really one of the parts that really makes the magic happen. So to get to the regulator seat, I'm going to put my Allen wrench back in the adjuster like so. I'm going to take another wrench to create some leverage, just press it through these holes so I can grab them and gently turn. And that's going to go ahead and take the adjuster apart. And the piece I'm going to show you next is called the regulator seat. And the way this works is this little seat is the part of the marker that like breaks in when people are like, oh, you get a new gun, you got to break it in. So what's actually happening is we're wearing this seat in and it should have a perfect circle in it if it's functioning well. So if you look closely, you can see this one has a pretty good circle and this gun's pretty new. But basically this piston pushes into this every time and opens and closes to control the airflow. And so if this is ever broken or cracked and you don't have a perfect circle, it'll cause your regulator to creep in pressure. So you'll basically slowly build pressure and a lot of times it'll cause the solenoid to vent. And then you'll shoot the gun, it'll stop for a second because it balances the regulator. And then as that pressure builds, it'll cause the regulator to vent again. So generally speaking, this is like one of the wear and tear parts we do have to replace eventually. You can flip these or replace them, but essentially about every 40K is kind of the magic number for servicing your regulator. And you want to look at this just to make sure that that's not a super deep circle worn into it where it's going to like crack soon or it doesn't have any cracks like across that circle. So that's the reg seat. Let's go ahead and put this adjuster back together now. And this doesn't have to be super tight. Hand tight is good enough. I just like using this little leverage point so I can get it in there a little bit easier, make it snug. And then essentially we do want to make sure we grease this O-ring here inside of the housing, or excuse me, inside of the adjuster like so. Put a little bit on a pick, a little bit on an O-ring or an Allen wrench also works. The other thing you can do is like just put grease on the outside of this shaft and then kind of again slide in the hole. We do want to avoid getting grease on the tip of the piston like what just happened because that's going to basically lube up the reg seat, which we want to try to avoid. So now that that's all lubed up, we'll go ahead and we will wipe off any old grease off the piston. This one was pretty dry. We'll go ahead and reapply grease to that. And when you're applying grease to any of these, the general idea is you want to have a nice light coating where you can kind of see that the voids of the O-ring are filled in. So you'll notice there's like grease around the top and the bottom of the O-ring with a light coating on it, but not like caked on there. There's not a whole bunch extra. So that's the idea when it comes to applying grease. And now let's put this whole thing back together. So first things first, let's set the piston down. We'll put our adjustment back together, adjuster screw. So this one's going to go ahead and slide in the housing. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of grease on this O-ring also. That'll just keep it so that essentially it adjusts a little bit easier. You'll be able to take and turn the adjuster with a little less resistance. So we want to press that all the way back through the housing. And then now we're going to go righty-tighty to get it to kind of get back to where it needs to go. And generally speaking, when I put this back in, I go to the point where when you look inside the housing, it's about flush, give or take, but that's kind of a good starting point to get close on the velocity. We do have another video we'll be releasing about adjusting the velocity, so I will link that also. And so now that the adjuster is back in there, we want to go ahead and put the spring in. Then we're going to go ahead and put the piston back in. And again, make sure you lube that piston up. See how that piston's about flush? Same idea, flush plus just a little bit. That's about how it should look. I'm also going to add just a little bit of grease to these O-rings. These are static O-rings, so they don't move. It's not super important to grease them up. It'll just make it so it goes back in the housing a little easier. And so now we're going to take this, we're going to slide it right back into the housing, stick it all the way in there. We're going to grab our 5/16 Allen wrench here, thread this back into place, put it all the way in. And then the very last step to finish servicing our regulator is going to be putting the reg cover back on. And so that wedges underneath the front, as you can see here, locks in place. We can take our locking cap, drop it in there, and just snug that down hand tight. That is your full regulator service for a DLX Luxe IDOL. Let us know if you have any questions.